Welcome to Cool Seminary Tutorials. Hi, I'm Professor Wendy. Today I'm excited to introduce 5 important precursors to the 16th century Protestant Reformation in the history of Christianity. Prior to the Protestant Reformation, there had been many efforts to reform what had become a corrupted church, but none of these succeeded in the large-scale overhaul of the church like the Reformation movement ignited by Martin Luther. Why did Luther succeed in launching a massive movement of reform when others before him experienced at best only partial or fleeting success? In this video, we'll look briefly at 5 precursors to the Protestant Reformation that helped set the stage for the widespread church reform that occurred in the 16th century. This is not a comprehensive list, but one that gives us an idea of some of what was going on at the time that undergirded and helped to build momentum for the large-scale reform that would follow. So let's begin with the list and then speak just a bit about each one. First, nationalism, humanism, conciliarism, mysticism, and then fifth, a growing number of reform-minded leaders and movements. First, nationalism. Prior to the Reformation, there was a long period of struggle between the papacy and a growing number of secular rulers in Europe. The Pope considered himself the international ruler of the world by God's appointing. But increasingly, national rulers came to different conclusions about who was in charge of their territories and people. For example, around 1300, Pope Boniface, King Edward I of England, and King Philip IV of France found themselves at bloody odds. You see, England and France went to war with each other, and both decided to levy a tax that included clergy landowners to help pay for their side of the war. The clergy, not especially fond of being taxed, appealed to Rome to put an end to the taxation, and the Pope responded by issuing a law against nations taxing clergy or the church. This action by the Pope did not please the kings, who were strapped for funds to pay for their war. And meanwhile, King Philip defeated King Edward. In response to the Pope's ban on taxing clergy and churches, King Philip marched with his army to Rome, captured the Pope, who soon thereafter died, and Philip forcibly moved the papacy to Avignon, France, where it was subsequently used by the monarchy to increase the power of the French king. So this is just one example of how growing nationalism challenged the papacy and helped to set the stage for the success of large-scale, widespread Reformation. There were growing undercurrents of nationalism in countries all across Europe. Next, let's look at humanism. Humanism was an outgrowth of the Renaissance. And while it assumed the reality of God, it was characterized by interest in the best of human experience across history and cultures, especially ancient Greek and Roman cultures, including classical literature, language, history, and philosophy. Humanism was an intellectual movement that pondered subjects like the freedom or liberty of the individual. Humanism raised questions about institutional authority and insisted on studying Scripture in its original textual languages and forms, rather than simply the additions handed down by the authority of the Pope. Many of the humanists dared to critique the Roman Church and its abuses, and some openly supported the growing nationalism that we've already discussed. A prime example of a humanist from this period is Desiderius Erasmus of Rotterdam, a Roman Catholic priest and linguistics scholar who called for reform in what many believed had become a terribly corrupted Roman Church. Erasmus wanted to help revitalize the church, but he wanted to do so without causing division. At first, he was connected with Martin Luther and applauded his work. But when he saw Luther's reforms leading toward schism, he withdrew his support and wrote a tract against Luther. Other examples of reforming humanists from the same era include the German scholar Johann Reuchlin and the English scholar and politician Thomas More. Number 3, conciliarism. The important role of church councils goes back to the early days in the history of the Christian church, when many major decisions, such as the nature of core doctrines, were decided by councils. In the 15th century, there was a resurgence of conciliarism in response to the French kings having taken captive the papacy and relocated it to France. Essentially, many in the church didn't like this move, to put it mildly, and efforts were made to overrule the French king through the action of church councils, made up of representatives from across the church. 3 major councils were held in the 15th century: the Council of Pisa in 1409, the Council of Constance 1414 to 1418, and the Council of Basel in 1431. In each council there was debate about the power of the church and the relationship of councils to the church. The end result of these councils was that the Pope retained ultimate power in the church, but these councils did succeed in raising the question in the minds of many about the extent of the Pope's power. 4th, mysticism. Mystics were those who believed you could have all the correct theology in the world and still miss the essence of Christianity. They believed the essence of Christianity to be an intense relationship or union with God. Some prime examples of mystics in the era leading up to the European Reformation include Catherine of Siena, John of the Cross, and Teresa of Avila. By virtue of their holy disciplines, their focus on the spiritual, and spreading of new orders of nuns and monks, mystics helped bring reform to the church. Many of them became well-known writers and leaders whose very words and lives offered effective critiques of church corruption. Finally, number 5, reform-minded leaders and movements. These emerged throughout Europe from the 12th to the 16th century, raising critical voices against the church's preoccupation with property, income, relics, and pilgrimages. Although each was different from the other, what they held in common was a passion for greater emphasis on Christian faith and life. These reform-minded leaders included Henry of Lausanne, France, Peter Waldo and the Waldensians of southern Europe, John Wycliffe of England, John Hus of Eastern Europe, now Czechoslovakia, and Girolamo Savonarola of Italy. These 5 precursors to the Reformation, nationalism, humanism, conciliarism, mysticism, and a variety of reform-minded leaders and movements, helped to set the stage for a new era in the life of the Christian church. Indeed, they each contributed in important ways to the larger Reformation that was to be ignited by the work of a Roman Catholic priest by the name of Martin Luther. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Please rate the video, post your comments, and subscribe. Have fun learning!